Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Now when the Pharisees and some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem gathered around Jesus, they noticed that some of his disciples were eating with defiled hands, that is, without washing them. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they thoroughly wash their hands, thus observing the tradition of the elders. And they do not eat anything from the market unless they wash it. And there are also many other traditions that they observe, the washing of cups, pots, and bronze kettles. So the Pharisees and the scribes asked him, "Why do your disciples not live according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with defiled hands?" He said to them, "Isaiah prophesied rightly about you hypocrites, as it is written, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines. You abandon the commandment of God and hold to human traditions.'" Then he called the crowd again and said to them, "Listen to me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside a person that by going in can defile, but the things that come out are what defile. For it is from within, from the human heart, that evil intentions come: fornication, theft, murder, adultery, avarice, wickedness, deceit, licentiousness, envy, slander, pride, folly. All these evil things come from within, and they defile a person." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
You may be seated. There is a folk tale that goes like this. Before placing the ham in the oven for baking, the mother cut off both ends. "Why did you cut the ends off the ham?" asked the daughter. "That's the way my mother always did it," was the reply. The daughter quickly vanished. In moments she was on the telephone to the grandmother, verifying whether or not what she had been told was true. The grandmother replied that she did indeed always cut the ends off the ham. When asked why, the grandmother replied, "That's the way my mother always did it." As fate would have it, the next week brought about a visit. Overcome with curiosity, as young children often are, nothing would do but to pose the same question. "Great-grandmother, Mommy always cuts the ends off her ham before she puts it in the oven. Mommy says she does it that way because that's the way grandmother always did it. Grandmother says she did it because that's the way you always did it. Is it true, great-grandmother? Did you always cut the ends off your ham?" "Yes, indeed, my child, I always cut the end off of the ham," replied the elderly woman. "But why?" asked the young girl. Holding her hands about 12 inches apart, she replied, "Because my pan was only this big." Maybe you've heard this story before. I remember hearing this story a few years back, and it stuck with me. Now, I don't remember who was telling it or what their purpose was in sharing it, and it actually took me a while to find the story online because I thought it was bread that was cut off to fit into a certain size basket, but not the point. Storytelling creates mental images that often stick with us and help us remember things in a way that's different from just talking at you. It's often why I try to include a story of some sort in my sermon so that you can easily recall what the message was after you leave church. After reading today's gospel story about tradition, this came to mind. I just couldn't help but think of this tradition of cutting off the ends and not knowing why, right? So today's gospel message might seem that Jesus is being a little harsh, or at least a little confusing on the surface. He doesn't want people to wash their hands before they eat. Come on now, that doesn't seem right. Especially since I know we were all taught to wash our hands, right? So Jesus' message for today seems a little off point. And the last time this came up in lectionary, it was like the middle of COVID. So washing hands was really, really important. But here's the thing. This isn't about the hand washing. Jesus is upset about a deeper issue, and that issue is holding on to tradition for tradition's sake. Whether that tradition is to make yourself look good or just because it's always been done that way, even if you have no clue why. Like the generation of the women cutting the ends off the ham and wasting food without knowing why it was done. This isn't a sermon bashing tradition, or a sermon bashing tradition? Tradition bashing sermon, that's not what it is, believe me. I love traditions. For example, playing games after holiday dinners is one that is so strong in my family that I didn't know that not everybody did that after holiday meals. I'm not kidding you. For my birthday parties with my friends growing up, we always went to the pumpkin farm every year, literally until I moved to college. And we would skip together across this bridge to see the painted pumpkins that were painted like the characters from The Wizard of Oz. Okay, so we would skip across the Yellow Brick Bridge. These are just a couple of traditions. I could go on and on about the traditions that I love and holding fast to them. But here's another thing about tradition. We also need room to grow and learn and not be so tied down to it that it limits us from trying something new. I love tradition, but I also love to be challenged to learn more in order to know where something came from or why we do it a certain way. Religion is steeped in tradition, but it's important for us to know and understand where they come from and if they're maybe even still relevant for us today. Doing something because that's how it's always been done is not a good enough reason to uphold tradition. And that's basically what Jesus is trying to say. Jesus says in verse 8, you abandon the commandment of God and hold to human tradition. The next couple verses are actually left out of the lectionary, and they point to the fifth commandment to honor one's parents. Jesus is referring to this because the religious leaders are choosing to follow tradition and saying they are honoring their elders, when actually below the surface they aren't taking care of their aging parents, and instead using all their money for themselves. So the fifth commandment is actually about providing for them when they are no longer capable of working and providing for themselves. So they say they're upholding this tradition when they're actually not. So you can see how Jesus finds these leaders to be hypocritical, right? They're doing this tradition of washing their hands before they eat, but then breaking this other tradition, but saying that tradition is so valuable. It's pretty hypocritical, right? Saying one thing, doing the other. Our inner thoughts and beliefs should match our behaviors and our actions. That's what Jesus is trying to get at. Verse 14 and 15 say, Jesus called the crowd again and said to them, listen to me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside a person that by going in can defile, but the things that come out are what can defile. And one of my favorite commentaries, Salt, explains what Jesus is saying by paraphrasing him in this way. These so-called religious specialists focus too much on externals, as if purity comes from keeping things out. But in fact, purity comes from within. It's what you do or don't do that can defile or dishonor you. And by the same token, it's what you do or don't do that can dignify and honor you. There's nothing wrong with washing your hands, but if you really want to wash your hands in a higher sense, if you really want to honor your elders, then following the major commandments, first of all, is more important. Support your father and mother. You hypocrites, don't waste your time pointing out the speck in your neighbor's eye, lest your judgmental words defile you. Instead, remove the log in your own eye. Put first things first, and for God's sake, don't use religion to express your contempt or to mask your unkindness or put yourself up on a pedestal, wagging your finger at those supposedly beneath you. True religion, true faith has the opposite effect, fostering compassion and humility and unmasking our judgmental ways. That's the end of the quote. I know it's long, but it was really good. I like when they paraphrase kind of this simple little thought that Jesus took and expand upon it, because we don't always get all of that messaging, right? This message for today is on tradition. And we all have room to grow and to learn more about history and why we do something the way we do. This helps us live our life to honor God through our actions and behaviors, and not just pay lip service to our faith. May it be so. Amen.
Amen.